Well, this morning we returned to our Through the Bible study. We're in the book of Genesis. We've come to the story of Jacob. So this week and in a couple of weeks, Brendan will speak next week. The week after that, I'll be talking again about the life of Jacob. Jacob's name means supplanter. A supplanter is someone who takes the place of someone else on purpose. So you're expecting this person, but you get that person instead. Jacob was a manipulator. He conned his brother. He deceived his father. He deceived his father with the help of his mother. Isn't that interesting? So before we get into Jacob's story today, though, I want to explain to you in your outline the concept of reaping or sowing and reaping, or reaping and sowing. I think I've got 5 things under that. Number one, some of these you'll be familiar with. Some may surprise you. Number one, we reap what we sow. We reap what we sow. So Galatians 6:7 says, do not be deceived. Could be translated, stop deceiving yourselves. God is not mocked. He's no fool. For whatever a man sows, this he will also reap. We get from life pretty much based on what we give to life. We get from others pretty much based on what we give to others. Matthew 7:1 says, do not judge so that you won't be judged. The point of that is not that you don't have an opinion about people and things. You have to have those. You have to make judgments, discernments about those kind of things. The point of those verses is this. If you cut other people some slack, they'll cut you some slack. If you give them grace, they'll give you grace. We reap what we sow. Good lives are almost always the result of good decisions made. The people who have good lives can almost all tell you exactly why they do. So if they have a good marriage, you say, why do you have a good marriage? They can tell you. If you say, you've been real successful in your career, how have you done that? They can tell you. If somebody's really close to God, really knows the Word, and you ask them how, they can tell you. They thought about this. They think about it all the time. They have a plan. They have a strategy. On the other hand, people who don't do well can seldom tell you why they don't. They almost always think that somehow they just were unlucky and the people doing well were lucky, or they think they're somehow victims who really didn't have a chance. It says that we're not to be deceived because we so often are. A lot of people, as I said in my prayer, don't connect the dots between what I do and what I'm eventually going to have and get. Write this down somewhere in your outline. What you're doing now will determine what you one day have and who you will one day be. What you're doing now will determine what you will one day have and where you'll one day be. Now, this year I will have my 50th high school reunion. See, I started school when I was minus 20, okay? That's how that worked. But anyway, 50th high school reunion. In high school, if you recall, you all seem so similar. I mean, everybody just seemed to be the same somewhat. And then each reunion you go back to, you realize how radically different you are from people you thought you were once like. It's kind of like if you've ever snorkeled or scuba dived. I've never scuba dived, but I've snorkeled a bunch. And you see a school of fish. It's kind of amazing. You have like 100 fish in this bunch. And they're all so close. But if you notice, they're all pointed in different directions. And so when this fish comes out of the school, he's going to end up way over there. When this fish comes out of the school, he's going to end up way over there. So people are going to make decisions, and those decisions are going to determine the outcomes in their lives. You will one day be who you are right now becoming. Why? Because you reap what you sow. You reap what you sow. Number 2, we reap according to how we sow. We reap according to how we sow. So how much we sow determines how much we reap. These verses tell you that what we get is determined by what we give. First, the words of Jesus in Matthew 6:38. Give and it'll be given unto you. He goes on to say, by your standard of measure, it'll be measured to you in return. Give and it'll be given to you. How much you get is determined by how much you give. Now, this is not a math equation. where I can give God $10 and get 100. But it's a general principle in life. We receive according to how we give. Bill Anderson was one of our deacons here for years and years, and chairman of our deacons for most of the years I've been here. And Bill one time was in a terrible accident. He was at St. Mary's Hospital about midnight. There must have been 100 people there. Why were 100 people there at midnight for Bill Anderson? Because if somebody he knew had been there, Bill Anderson would have been at that hospital. He had given much to many. And so when he was at that point of crisis, people were there for him. In 2 Corinthians 9:6, it says, he who sows sparingly will also reap sparingly. He who sows bountifully will also reap bountifully. Sow a little, get a little. Sow a lot, reap a lot. So if you want more, reap more. You want to get more, give more. We reap according to how we sow. Number 3, we reap more than we sow. We reap more than we sow. Now, Granger County, just a couple of miles down the road, is famous for its tomatoes. You can plant one tomato seed and get one tomato plant. One tomato plant, I looked this up on the internet, can produce as many as 90 tomatoes. 90 tomatoes. Can you imagine? You wonder why people are always giving you tomatoes? That's why. They had no idea it was going to produce that much. We did that one time. They're reaping far more than they sow. Now, when we do the right thing, we often reap much more good than we sow. We do something good, but the return ends up being really disproportionately better than what we earned with what we did. And the same thing can be true on the negative side. Sometimes you sow a little bad, but you don't reap a little bad, you end up reaping a lot of bad. You reap more than you sow. In Hosea 8:7, the Bible puts it this way: they sow the wind, but they reap the whirlwind. So you reap what you sow, you reap according to how you sow, you reap more than you sow. Number 4, we reap later than we sow. We reap later than we sow. You plant a seed, then you got to wait for that seed to germinate, and then you got to wait for it to grow into a plant, and then you got to wait for it to produce the fruit you're hoping for. So when we sow, we wait. And after we wait some time, we reap. In these 2 verses in your outline, you're going to see that this is true both when we do what is wrong and when we do what's right. So in Ecclesiastes 8, verse 11, it says, because the sentence against an evil deed is not executed quickly, therefore the hearts of the sons of men among them are given fully to do evil. In other words, because people who do wrong do not immediately reap what they sow, they think they can keep sowing that and not have problems. So for example, you've heard the expression, liar, liar, pants on fire. If liars' pants immediately caught fire, there wouldn't be any liars, okay? You'd either burn up or repent, one or the other, right? You just wouldn't do it. But the truth is, you can lie and lie and lie without your pants being on fire. But someday, later, you're going to reap what you've been sowing. You can get away with sin. Seem to be getting away with it for a long time. But the day's going to come when you reap what you sow. You reap what you sow, but you reap later than you sow. Now, same thing's true of good. Look, Galatians 6:9. You ought to memorize this verse. Let us not lose heart in doing good, for in due time we shall reap if we do not grow weary. So what's he telling us? He's telling us the opposite of kind of what I just told you. When you do the right thing, when you do the good thing, you don't immediately reap the benefit. There's not an immediate investment on return when we obey the Lord or do what we ought to do. It's usually going to come sometime later. The reward is seldom immediately. And if you haven't noticed, it's easy to do the wrong thing on the front end, but you pay for it on the back end. It's usually hard to do the right thing on the front end, but you benefit from it on the back end. You eventually, both cases, reap what you've sown. So we will reap what we sow eventually, if not immediately. But we must do good knowing that there will usually be time between investment and return. Well, I got right with the Lord, and I've been trying to do everything the Lord wants me to do, and my life hasn't gotten any better. This verse is for you. Do not grow weary in doing good, for in due time we shall reap if we don't grow weary. King James says lose heart there. Write this down. The primary purpose of doing good is not what we get from it, but who we become by it. The primary purpose of doing good is not what we get from it, it's who we become by it. So our goal should not be, I'll do good, I'll get this. No, God says, do good and you'll become this. You'll become more like me. When people do the wrong thing and when they do the right thing, they almost always reap later than they sowed. Later than they sowed. Number 5, we reap what others sow. This seldom gets talked about. We don't just reap what we sow, we reap what others sow. The young people in Israel wandered in the wilderness for 40 years because of their parents' unbelief and disobedience. The kids reaped what the parents sowed. That's always true. Some of us are here, we have hugely benefited from good parents. Some of us are here and we've been broken and crippled by bad parents. We've reaped what they've sown. Some of you have been hurt by somebody who abused you in some way. You've reaped what they sowed. Had nothing to do with you. It was what they sowed. Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were obedient to the Lord. But the nation was in sin, and so the whole nation goes into slavery. And so the 4 of them end up in Babylon. They didn't deserve to be there. They weren't reaping what they sowed. They were reaping what the nation had sowed. In that case, Judah, the southern kingdom. And then you have John the Baptist. John the Baptist, you remember, was arrested and through some trickery of Herod Antipas's wife, she requested, her daughter danced, and he said, ask me for anything and I'll give it to you. And he said, the mother told the daughter to tell Herod that I want the head of John the Baptist on a platter. And she got it. She got it. What happened? John the Baptist reaped what Herod Antipas sowed. These are all examples of that. So we're all reaping the benefits of what someone else has sown. Parents, pastors, friends, bosses, mates, some of you, your children. And many of us are suffering the consequences of the bad behavior that others have sown. We've reaped what they sowed. We didn't deserve it. We just happened to be in their way. Victims of abuse obviously are reaping what bad people are sowing. Now here's the 6th one. I talk about this here. Not a lot of other people talk a lot about it. Number 6, we reap what man's sin has sown. We reap what man's sin has sown. So Solomon in the book, remember in Genesis, when Adam and Eve sinned, everything got broken. Their relationship with God, broken. Their relationship with each other, broken. The creation, broken. Eden gets closed. The whole world comes under a curse. Talks about this in Romans chapter 8. And so everything now is messed up. We live in a world where nothing is like it was supposed to be. Nothing. Solomon in the book Ecclesiastes gives us a biblical view of reality. I love this book because of this. You know, Christians, we can tend to just kind of live this pie in the sky thing. You know, some people think, well, you know, if you love Jesus, nothing bad will happen to you. Well, John the Baptist loved Jesus and got beheaded. All the apostles got killed except John. He got exiled and died of old age because he loved Jesus. Jesus got crucified for being perfect and doing the right thing. See, that's la-la land Christianity. Well, if I love the Lord and walk with him, nothing bad can happen to me or those I love. That's not biblical. It's not biblical. And so Solomon just cuts right through all that and shakes us back to reality. So in Ecclesiastes 3:16, he says, I've seen that in the place of justice there is wickedness, and in the place of righteousness there is wickedness. So he said, where there ought to be justice, I've seen where there is none. And where the people ought to be doing the right thing, I've seen that they're doing the wrong thing. In 7:15, he tells us this. He says that he's seen a righteous man who perishes in his righteousness and a wicked man who prolongs his life in wickedness. I've seen people who did the right thing die young. I've seen people who did the wrong thing live long lives. And the whole book, he talks about this vanity. It's what he's saying is, it's not right. It's not fair. It's not just. No, it isn't. But it's reality. In chapter 8, verse 14, he says this: he's seen the righteous men to whom it happens according to the deeds of the wicked, and evil men to whom it happens according to the deeds of the righteous. He said, I've seen righteous people with lots of problems, and I've seen wicked people blessed. How many of you have seen the same thing? If you hadn't seen that, you hadn't been paying attention. It's reality. That's the real world we live in, not this pie-in-the-sky Christianity where I can fix all my problems with some pithy saying that I can put on a T-shirt or on a bumper sticker. Try that when your life falls apart. You're going to need a lot more than a pithy saying. That is TH, okay, in case that's coming out wrong. Life in this cursed world is neither just, fair, or right. Bad things happen to the best of people, and sometimes good things happen to the worst of people. Adrian Rogers lost a child to crib death on Mother's Day. Pretty cruel, isn't it? Right when he got up, he wouldn't have retired when he did, but he got cancer soon after that died. Some of y'all are familiar with Berean Christian School and Church. John Stone pastored there for 40 years. Great guy, his wife Phyllis, great lady, loved the Lord. He retired, immediately got pancreatic cancer. Soon after that, she got it, and in 2 or 3 years, they were both dead. Ron Stewart at Grace, they retired. Betsy and I took them out to lunch and just kind of celebrated their ministry and what they had done. And 6 months later, Becky had cancer and was gone. Loving Jesus doesn't fix everything this world has broken. And we often are reaping what man's sin has brought upon us. Now, what Solomon says is summed up kind of in Ecclesiastes 9, verse 11. And there he says that time and chance overtake them all. Time and chance. Sometimes things are going to happen into our lives that the devil didn't cause, that God didn't cause, that other people didn't cause, that we didn't cause. Stuff just happens in a cursed world. Cancer, for example. It doesn't care if you're lost or saved. It doesn't care if you're rich or poor. It doesn't care if you're good or bad. It doesn't care if you're healthy or unhealthy. Time and chance overtake us all. So I lost my dad to cancer when I was 4.5. The song Home Free by Wayne Watson, if you ever heard that song, you need to Google it and listen to it, and particularly look at the words. It's written about Betsy's cousin Sandra. Great lady. 4 small children, the oldest of which is now married to Mike Weaver, Big Daddy Weave, Candace. But Sandra got cancer and died in her early 30s. And in that song, Wayne Watson talks about the suffering's no respecter of age or position. In a cursed world, good people suffer. And sometimes the bad people don't. There will be times in our lives when time and chance overtake every one of us. Sometimes we reap what man's sin has sown. So we reap what we sow. We reap according to how we sow. We reap more than we sow. We reap later than we sow. We reap what others sow, and sometimes we reap what man's sin has sown. Now let's look at Jacob. We'll talk about what he sowed and therefore reaped. So these true stories are found in Genesis 25 to 31. To understand the story of Jacob, it's useful to understand his relationship with his parents and brother. Jacob was a homebody who enjoyed cooking. His just seconds older twin brother Esau was an outdoorsman who loved to hunt. Their father Isaac loved the food. He loved wild game that Esau would kill and cook for him, and therefore he favored Esau. It tells us in Genesis 25:28 that Isaac loved Esau. Jacob, the homebody, enjoyed cooking, was more attached to his mother, and it says there that, but Rebekah loved Jacob. The two parents both had their favorite children. In case you're taking notes, this is not good, okay? Not good. It's never in the best interest of a child or his siblings or her siblings to show preference to one child over another. It's just never a good idea. As a parent, you're always having to balance that. Now, do you reward good behavior? Yes. Do you punish bad behavior? Yes. But you got to do everything you can to keep that playing field fair for your kids. If not, they'll resent their sibling and they'll resent you. Jacob is the recipient of favoritism here. Later, he'll be the giver of it to his son Joseph, which, as you'll see, caused a whole lot of problems. And of course, you already know that story. I did a message on this on September 22nd of last year called When Parents Favor Children. It's never a good idea. It's bad for the child, it's bad for the siblings, and it's bad for the family. And you see that all through this story and through Jacob's family in the next story. So write this down. Our pasts do not excuse us, but they do help to explain us. Our pasts do not excuse us, but they help to explain us. So somebody has had a really hard childhood. They may now be living really poorly now and making really bad choices. Their past doesn't excuse what they're doing, but it can help to explain it. And so understanding Jacob and Esau will help that. Jacob was jealous of his brother. His father preferred Esau over him. Esau, being the firstborn, would receive the greater inheritance by lot, his birthright, and he would receive his father's blessing, which was a huge deal back in those days in that culture. Now, put in your outline that there are two kinds of people. There are two kinds of people. First, there are people who love others. There are people who love others. People who love are other-centered. They do things for the benefit of others, not just what benefits them. Look at what Jesus said in Luke chapter 6, verse 35. Love, do good, expect nothing in return, and your reward will be great, and you'll be sons of the Most High, for he himself is kind to ungrateful men. It grieves me. I've thought about this in the last couple of weeks. It just grieves me how self-serving people are. It's not just people who don't go to church, it's people who do go to church. We do what we do because of what we're going to get out of it. When we had our musical, I sent out a heartfelt email. Say, you know what? You can come once. Why do you come once? Because you want to see if it does anything for you. Or you can come 3 times because you want to encourage and support these people who work so hard and give you this worship, great worship, week after week after week after week. See the difference? One's about me. Yeah, I want to hear that. My Christmas will be better if I come to a great musical production. We don't think, you know what? I've heard it once. I enjoyed it. I'll hear it a couple more times just so I can be an encouragement to them. That's a person who loves other people. That's an other-centered person. Our deal is more like this. I'll serve you if I get something out of it, something in return. What's in it for me? So few people live their lives thinking about the needs and wants of other people. People who love well don't just ask, what's in it for me? They ask, what's in it for the people I can help? And your goal in life should be to live this abundant life, to be so full in yourself and your walk with God that you are free and wanting to give to other people. You just want to spill all this out on other people. Look at Philippians 2, 3 and 4. Do nothing from selfishness or empty conceit, but with humility of mind, regard one another as more important than yourselves. Do not merely look out for your own personal interests, but also for the interests of others. I'm going to do a marriage retreat for Jeff Meeks. Some of y'all remember Jeff Meeks on staff here years ago. He's down in Augusta, Georgia. Going to do a marriage retreat for them next month. And this verse right here solves every marriage problem. See, the way you do a Christian marriage, which, by the way, most Christians don't have a Christian marriage. Being Christians doesn't make your marriage Christian. Doing marriage like the Bible says to do it makes your marriage Christian. If you've got a Christian marriage, the most important person in the marriage is the other person. The most important happiness in the marriage is for the other person to be happy. Now, you can't do this with an abuser or a bad, evil person. But if you're not married to one of those, this is how they're supposed to work. So you want them to get their way. Most marriages is about getting our way. It's working things so we can get what we want. And then it gets so bad, and you want to know how dark we really are? How full of sin we really are? When a wife knows what a husband wants, she can give it, but she's not going to. I'm telling you, that's dark. That's not just selfish, that's evil. Or a man knows exactly what his wife wants. He can give it to her, but he ain't going to do it. That's dark. That's evil. Now, the other side of that coin is, I know what buttons to push on you, and if you cross me, I'll push them. The state of marriages is sad. It's just sad. Why? Because they're not Christian. If you'd just be Christian, you'd have a great marriage. You put the other person first, they put you first. In a Christian marriage, there's not me and you. See, too many marriages, the two become one, and one of them's decided that one's going to be them. So they get their way. They do what they want to do. And if the other person doesn't do what they want to do, the other person gets punished. That's not a Christian marriage. That's abuse. In a Christian marriage, there's we. In a Christian marriage, it's, I will not be happy unless you're happy. If somebody has to lose, I'll lose, not you. If we both can't get what we want, you'll get what you want. That is a Christian marriage. And sadly, there aren't many of them. Real sadly. Because we want what we want. It's based more on selfishness. We're going to get what we want to have, and you're just going to have to deal with it. Put up with it. Come along. See, a Christian would never do that to their spouse. You'd never make any big decision without both of you being completely on board. So I'm the man. I'm the head of the home. You know what the head means? That means that you serve the body. You're mentally ill if you do anything that hurts your body. So you might be a head, but you're a mentally ill head. If you're a Christian head, then everything you do is about making sure your wife gets what she wants. And if she's a Christian wife, not just a wife who is a Christian, then she's just doing everything she can to make sure you get everything you want. And marriage is like leadership. If you do it right, the longer you do it, the better it gets. And if you do it wrong, the longer you go, the worse it gets. So you want to see how you're doing? Ask yourself, is our marriage better than it's ever been or not? If it's better than it's ever been, you're doing some things right. If it's not, you're not. You're just not. That was all free. That wasn't in my notes, okay? If we regard others as more important than ourselves, then you often do things for their sake. You know, I don't really want to do this. I don't really want to go there, but she does. He does. So not only will I go, I'll go with a good attitude. For how you do it for what will benefit them, not you. Now, we do this with our children all the time. You know, we're going to take our kids to Disney World or, a redneck Disney World, Dollywood, Pigeon Forge. You know, we've had our grandkids up there at Wilderness and Smokies. You do things for your kids and grandkids. You think, this is near hell for me, but they enjoy it. And so not only will we do it, I'll put out a bunch of money and have a good attitude about it. That's what love does. I get no benefit out of this except their joy. That's what love does. Sadly, too few of us do this with our spouses. And we don't live this way in regard to others. People who love do things for other people's sake, not their own. The purest form of love is doing something for people who can't do anything for you. People at this dump in Victoria Falls, Zimbabwe, just sending money for food this week. And Betsy and I, we're going back in September. I kind of don't want to go. I hate the trip. It's a brutal trip. But we're going back in September. We just need to go over there because so much has happened, and we just need to go put our eyes and hands on it. But you know, when you give to that, you're doing something for people that can do nothing for you. And it really feels good, doesn't it? When we do the Christmas party, and we bring all these needy families in, and we give them all this stuff, and we see the joy they have and the tears and all the rest, because they weren't going to have any kind of Christmas. Those people can do nothing for us. And it feels so good. You know why? Because loving somebody feels really good. What we think about is being loved by somebody. Well, we think that feels good. No, God wired you up when you love people, when you serve people, you feel good. We just did this thing on loneliness last week and talked about how to feel better about yourself. Do something for somebody else. You'll feel good. Why? Because God wired you up that way. Helping people who can't help you makes you feel really good because that's how God made us, to love others. So some people love others. Number two, there are people who use others. They use them for significance, for security, for social standing, for pleasure, and more. I was just reading this article. It's just a fascinating article about this girl who went into the Playboy Mansion, eventually was married to Hugh Hefner. He was 86, she was 26. I'm sure he married her because she found him to be so interesting. Right? Why'd she do that? Position, power, fame, money. She would meet all kinds of superstars and probably politicians and other people flying under the radar in that world. She's just using them for what she wanted. People use people for significance. They use them for security, for social standing, for pleasure, and more. They're in a relationship for what they can get out of it. A great biblical example of this is found in Matthew 27, 3-5. Judas has betrayed Jesus for money. He later feels remorse. He goes back to the priest. He tells them, I betrayed innocent blood. And their response was, what is that to us? I'll paraphrase it. Do you think we care? We don't. We were just using you to get what we want. We don't care what you think. We don't care how you feel. We just used you. And there's a lot of people like that. They'll just use you. If you know, or especially if you marry a narcissist, you'll find out you just get used. I said all of that to say this. Jacob didn't love people at this point in his life. He just used them. And then he eventually got used. You've heard the expression, what goes around comes around. What we're doing now will affect our lives later. We will reap what we sow. So let's look at how Jacob reaped what he sowed. Number one, Jacob conned Esau to obtain Esau's birthright. He conned Esau to obtain Esau's birthright. In Genesis 25, 29-34, Esau comes in from hunting and he's famished. Jacob is cooking his favorite stew, and he wants some of that stew. Jacob seizes the opportunity, takes advantage of his brother's impulsive nature and desperate hunger, and says, I'll give you some stew only if you'll give to me your birthright. And so he cons Esau out of his birthright. Esau agrees to the deal. Verse 34 says, in doing so, Esau despised his birthright. Like most impulsive decisions made, Esau later had great regret for what he had done. Jacob used and took advantage of his twin brother's weakness. He conned Esau out of his birthright. Number two, Jacob deceived his father to obtain his father's blessing. He deceived his father to obtain his father's blessing. We choose the kind of person we're going to become. But listen closely. Over time, we become more of that person. Years ago, some of you remember Ruth and Clyde Clapp, and they were both just some of the most wonderful people who've ever been in these doors. And we were over there, I think it was when Ruth had cancer, and we were over there, and we were talking to Ruth, and Betsy asked the question, said, why is it that some older people are just so incredibly nice and sweet, and some of them are just hard and mean? And Ruth had the most profound answer. She said, people become more of what they are as they age. So bad people become worse. Good people become better. Sweet people become sweeter. Mean people become meaner. Giving people become more giving. Selfish people become more selfish. And that's what's happening to Jacob here. Time goes by, he's becoming more of who he was. Jacob is learning that he can get what he wants if he cons, if he deceives, if he uses people. In Genesis 27, 1-41, Isaac is now an old man. He can barely see and he can barely hear. Isaac tells his favorite son Esau to kill and cook his favorite meal and bring it to him, and he would give Esau his blessing. Jacob's mother, Isaac's wife, overhears the conversation. And so while Esau's out hunting, she has some of that meat. She goes and prepares that meal, and with her son deceives Isaac into blessing Jacob. And sure enough, that's what Jacob did. You can read the details, but Jacob deceives Isaac, who mistakenly gives Jacob his blessing. After doing so, Esau returns to discover that his twin brother had supplanted him, had taken his place, deceived his dad. He then begins to plot the murder of his deceitful twin brother. At this point in life, Jacob doesn't love people, he uses them. He's taken advantage of Esau to get his birthright. He's lied and conned his father to get his father's blessing. We reap what we sow. But the tables are about to turn. Jacob will soon start reaping what he's been sowing. Knowing that Esau's planning to kill Jacob, Rebekah, the mother, sends Jacob to her brother Laban's house, which brings us number 3. Laban conned and deceived Jacob. Laban conned and deceived Jacob. In Genesis 29, 15-28, Jacob gets to Laban's place. He falls head over sandals for Laban's daughter, Rachel. The user, Jacob, has now met another user. Laban tells Jacob that he'll give Rachel to him in marriage if Jacob will work for him for 7 years. Jacob is so infatuated with Rachel, he agrees to do it. At the end of the 7 years, there's a marriage ceremony. Jacob thinks he's married Rachel, but he wakes up the next morning with her older and not as cute sister, Leah. The Bible doesn't tell us how he could be deceived like that, only that he was. Maybe God did it. You know, in Thessalonians, it talks about the people who had a chance to be saved before the rapture will not be saved after the rapture because God will delude them. So maybe God is the one who deceived him. Maybe he got drunk, I don't know what. But anyway, whatever reason, he wakes up with the wrong girl. The user just got used. The con man got conned. Leah had supplanted Rachel. Sidebar. If you work 7 years to get to marry someone, think that you have, but wake up to discover that you're married to someone else, like the children's book character, Alexander, you're having a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day. Jacob was reaping what he had sown. He had a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day. As Spanky McFarland of Spanking Our Gang would say, and how? Jacob then had to work another 7 years to get to marry the girl he thought he had already married. Jacob is reaping what he had sown. Laban conned and deceived him. And then we learn, number 4, that Jacob married a dishonest wife. He's dishonest. Now he's married a woman who is. The dishonest man ends up with a dishonest wife. In Genesis 31, 17 to 41, Jacob sneaks off with his wives, children, and livestock, leaves Laban. Laban comes looking for him. Someone had stolen Laban's household idols. Jacob tells Laban that whoever's found with him will immediately be put to death. He has no idea that the woman who took him was his adored Rachel. Knowing that her father was searching each tent for the idols, Rachel put him under a camel's saddle and deceived her father. Sound familiar? Deceived her father. She told her father she couldn't get up because, quote, the manner of women was upon her. I submit to you, the manner of Jacob was upon her. She's a liar. She's a cheat. She's a con. If you go back and read the story, if you go back and look at the genealogies, it's interesting to note that Jacob should have married Leah to begin with. She is the ancestor of Jesus, not Rachel. But see, that's what happens when you walk by sight, not by faith. When you just follow your heart, as they say on Hallmark, instead of doing the right thing. But wait, there's more. We reap what we sow. We reap later than we sow. We reap more than we sow. The deceiving life of Jacob would now get passed down to the next generation. Number 5, Jacob raised dishonest children. He raised dishonest children. In Genesis 37, 1 to 36, the con man gets conned again, this time by his children. They were going to kill his favorite son, but instead sold Joseph into slavery. They tore up his I'm dad's favorite tunic, covered it with animal blood so that Jacob would believe that Joseph had been devoured by a wild animal. As you know, they instead sold him as a slave to get some money for it instead. Jacob grieved for Joseph at least 20 years. It doesn't say he recovered until he saw the wagons coming from Egypt and he knew Joseph was actually alive. Jacob, who had caused so much grief to others, was now the one grieving. The deceiver was now the one deceived. He was reaping what he had sown. So Jacob gives us this great example of reaping what we sow, according to how we sow, more than we sow, later than we sow, and then he reaped what someone else sowed. Galatians 6:7 says, do not be deceived. We do reap what we sow. We don't reap immediately, but we do most definitely. In your outline, I put 3 final verses on that. Verse 1, 2 Corinthians 5:10. We must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ so that each one may be recompensed for his deeds in the body according to what he's done, whether good or bad. In other words, we're all going to appear before Christ and reap what we've sown. If not immediately, eventually we ultimately reap what we've sown, both good and bad. 1 Corinthians 3:8, each will receive his own reward according to his own labor. Notice that we will be rewarded for what we've done. We will receive our own reward based on our own labor. Now listen closely, this is real important for some of you. Some of you have been doing the right thing, and honestly you're wondering, is it worth it? I've been doing the right thing. I've been trying to do the right thing for a long time, and I'm not getting any return on investment. What I hope for isn't coming true. What I wish to avoid hasn't gone away. Is it worth it? I want you to know it is. We almost always reap later than we sow. And a part of what God wants to do with you is bring you to the point where you trust Him if you don't get what you want. If you only trust Him when you get what you want, you're just using Him and probably aren't trusting Him. You're just trusting the process. But you trust Jesus when you'll keep trusting Him, believing in Him, following Him, walking with Him when you don't get what you want. Years ago, my sister was 52. She was dying of complications from diabetes. I'd go see her in the nursing home, and she had asked me, every time I go, she had said, please pray that I die. She was in so much pain from neuropathy, none of the meds would touch it. Please pray for me that I die. And someone who found out about that came up to me, and they thought they were pretty spiritual. And they said, well, do you have enough faith for God to heal her? And I said, I've got enough faith for him not to. Do you have enough faith in God to not get what you want? Do you have enough faith in God to love him if your prayer goes unanswered? If the cancer does take out the person you love? Do you have that kind of faith? That's the kind of faith God wants you to have. Notice we will be rewarded for what we have done. Some of you, again, keep doing the right thing. Go back to Galatians 6:9. Let us not lose heart in doing good, for in due time we will reap if we do not grow weary. Jot down and listen to 1 Corinthians 15:58. Be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that your toil is not in vain in the Lord. Because there's space between sowing and reaping, the devil will tell you your toil for the Lord is in vain. What you're doing, trying to do the right thing, trying to follow him, being obedient to him, it's not working. Give it up. And this says, be steadfast and immovable, abounding in those works. Why? Because your toil is not in vain in the Lord. God is not blind to the good you do. He sees. He will reward it in this life or in eternity. I mean, just think about it. You get cancer. You're hoping you'll live, praying that God will heal you. The greatest thing that can happen to you is for him not to. And if you really believe the Bible, really believe in heaven, then I might live, but the best thing could happen would be if I didn't. Then I go to be with the Lord. Maybe we ought to do a lot more. We go pray for people to be healed. We ought to go to people ought to say, don't pray for me to be healed. Pray that I go out quick and painless, okay? That's what I need you to pray for. I'd prefer heaven over this. Death really reveals what people actually believe, like nothing else. So that's the good side. Keep doing the right thing. But what if I'm sinning and I seem to be avoiding any consequences to my sin? Never forget what we're told in Numbers 32:23 there in your outline. Be sure your sin will find you out. Just because a judgment isn't executed quickly or immediately doesn't mean God's not going to judge you. God is omnipresent. He's everywhere all the time. He's omniscient. He's all-knowing. There's nothing he doesn't know. The Bible says he knows our words before we speak them. Obviously, our thoughts before we think them. He knows our sins before we commit them. Do you think we're sinning and he's not seeing it? Or do you think that he doesn't care because nothing bad's happening right now? Well, that's because we reap later than we sow. You can't hide from him. He sees, he knows, he's righteous, he's just. Make no mistake about it, he disciplines and he judges. We may think we're getting away with some sin. We're not. Eventually, as sure as you're sitting there, your sin will find you out. Now pay close attention to what it says. It doesn't say your sin will be found out. It's already found out. God knows what you're doing. It says your sin will find you out. You'll pay a price for it. Don't mistake, write this down somewhere. Never mistake God's patience for his indifference. That can be for good and bad. Never mistake his patience for his indifference. What you uncover and confess, God will cover and forgive. But what you deny, cover, and try to hide, God will expose and judge. Do not be deceived. Whatever a man sows, this he will also reap.